And tonight we have a very special guest. John Bates is the author of 7 books and a contributor to 7 others, all of which focus on the natural history of the Northwoods. He's worked as a naturalist in Wisconsin's Northwoods for 22 years, leading an array of trips, all designed to help people further understand the remarkable diversity and beauty of nature and our place within it. He also conducts outdoor classes for Nicolet College, the University of Wisconsin Extension, and the North Lakeland Discovery Center. For 20 years, he has written a bi-weekly column, a Northwoods Almanac, for the Lakeland Times in Minocqua. He also serves on the Board of Trustees for the Wisconsin Nature Conservancy and the Wisconsin Humanities Council. John won the 2006 Ellis Henderson Outdoor Writing Award from the Council for Wisconsin Writers for his book Graced by the Seasons, Spring and Summer in the Northwoods. And John and his wife Mary live on the Manitowish River in Iron County, where they raise 2 daughters. And I'm very excited about his presentation tonight. I chose it specially because it is the far side of wildlife ecology, and I grew up with my parents who came tonight reading the Far Side comics. So I hope you enjoy them as much as I do tonight. Let's welcome John Bates.
I learned a long time ago in giving talks that there's tons of expertise in audiences that I speak with. So I would love it if at any point you have additions, corrections, better stories, better jokes, better anything. Just jump right in. It makes it more interactive, more enjoyable for all of us if you do that rather than just listening to me. So please jump in at any point. I would love that rather than be distressed by it, okay? The whole point of this talk is to have fun with wildlife ecology concepts. A lot of science puts people to sleep, and a lot of it goes over folks' head, including my own. So Gary Larson's really good, if you know his cartoons, at pinpointing some really good wildlife concepts and just getting to the heart of things. If you know many scientists, almost every scientist has one or many of these in these cartoons in their office because it tickles them so much and it really gets to the heart of who they are and often what they do. So I'm just going to run with it, have fun with it. Hopefully you can apply some of the concepts to where you live, where you walk, where you paddle on lakes, any way that you can. Hopefully some of it makes some sense to you. I'll read all the captions in case you can't. So this is God as a kid tries to make a chicken in his room. So I see this as a different version of the Big Bang Theory. And it works just as good for me as the Big Bang. We're going to do history, the whole entire history of the Earth in about 45 seconds. So here's the basic timeline of 4.6 billion years, give or take, a billion or so. Lord knows how they come up with these numbers. But hopefully you can see, it's just crazy how long this planet has been evolving and changing over time. And that whole change in evolution is all about natural selection. All species evolve through natural selection. This says natural selection at work. Some wolves overlooking the sheep there. And I don't wish at all to get into any religious discussion or controversy relative to evolution versus spiritual dimension. Evolution absolutely occurs. Natural selection absolutely occurs. There isn't an argument about that. Because you can just think of resistance to antibiotics or to farm herbicides, insecticides. Insects and plants will, over time, naturally select those that are most resistant, and then you have to change the herbicide, etc. So we see this happen all the time. You have to change the antibiotic. But these little words down here says, does natural selection or evolution negate the presence of God? My opinion, no. The two can perfectly coexist, and in my heart and my mind, they do. So I hope I don't offend anybody by talking about natural selection or evolution. It just is part of who we are as human beings and part of the natural world. And the spirit can live within that easily. So here's an example of natural selection. Say, look what they're doing. Yeah, so who's getting selected here? The ones on the top will be the ones who win the natural selection in this case. So 65 million years ago, we had the first mass extinction. This says The picture's pretty bleak, gentlemen. The world climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we all have a brain about the size of a walnut. So that was a problem back then. And, you know, fast forward, I said 45 seconds to hunter-gatherer societies when something akin to us supposedly appeared, perhaps in the last 200,000 years. I love Calvin and Hobbes. I'm not going to school anymore. Oh, nope, I've decided to be a hunter-gatherer. When I grow up, I'll be living naked in a tropical forest, subsisting on berries, grubs, and the occasional frog, and spending my free time grooming for lice. All the experts say is bad parenting to squelch a kid's ambitions. So, we came on the scene as human beings, and our population very, very gradually begins to grow. Crime in me, it seems like every summer there's more and more of these things around. And so when you look at a chart of human population growth, it is pretty stagnant for a very long time. Here we're coming at 7,000 BC, and you know, we're not going anywhere quick until we get to about 1800s, and suddenly we start jumping up with the Industrial Revolution, and now we go through the roof, right? I was born in 1951, and I believe at that time, somebody help me, I think there were 3 billion maybe people on the earth in 1951, and what, we're at 8 billion now. So just in my lifetime, almost tripled your lifetimes as well, right? Just astonishing amount of growth, and how that impacts wildlife, of course, is rather substantial. And we tend not to talk much about population growth because it's so controversial and so difficult to deal with. But it's a part of what we have to contend with when we're dealing with wildlife ecology issues. The other complexity, of course, is just how phenomenally diverse the world is. 8.7 million species, maybe, who knows, really. 7.7 million species of animals. Only have actually described about 1 million of those. So most of those are insects, right? God or evolution had a very strong interest in beetles. I don't know if God did it, all of this, God really was focused on beetles, really like beetles. But anyway, plants and fungi and protozoa and so forth and so on. Amazing, amazing array of complexity. And I bring this up here because the world's more complex than we ever will think it is, and in fact, I think it's way more complex than we're capable of thinking. Yes, sir?
How are those numbers projected?
How are those numbers projected?
Anyway, 10 times what we already described in that way.
That's a great question. I really don't know. I just looked it up in some research papers, and I don't know. Sorry, can't tell you. People way smarter than me. So the world's more complex than we think, and more complex than we can actually think, but still, we need to think about it, right? And when we think about Wisconsin, here's a breakdown of the biodiversity, more or less in our state. Hopefully you can see those kinds of numbers. I love just looking at freshwater mussels, 81 species insects, somewhere in the range of 20,000 to 40,000. Insects cause all the problems because there's so many and so difficult to identify. 700 species of lichens alone. Plants, over 2,600 species. Almost 2,000 are native. So just in Wisconsin, just to try to name these, much less understand their particular natural histories, and then understand how they interact with other species, it's just an endless, impossible task to try to do. But we're called upon to do that. And we're called upon, first of all, to try to give things the dignity of their names. But I think there's an issue with that. Sometimes when we give things the dignity of their names, we just walk by them after we've given their name. Oh, that's a red oak, and, you know, that's a white oak, etc. Sally Carragher has a different view. She says, I held a blue flower in my hand, probably a blue aster, wondering what its name was, and then thought that human names are superfluous. Nature does not name them. The important thing is to know this flower, look at its color, until the blueness becomes as real as a keynote of music. So how can you every day bring yourself to look at the common and see the miraculous, see the extraordinary in that species, and to want to understand it even more? And it's important to understand those names. Here's the caption, look out, Thak, it's a dang, never can pronounce those things. Names are important. Thak was about to discover that. So that's the place we have to start, is to try to give things their names. Once we've gotten to the place of at least having an idea on things, then we need to talk about what is it that they need in order to live. What's their life history about? And we simplify this into this statement of food, water, and cover is what all wildlife needs. But it's incredibly complicated beyond that because there's timing involved in this. There's seasonality. Things are different from autumn to winter to spring, obviously. There's competition between species and between the plants they may eat. Carrying capacity issues on how much the habitat can sustain, all kinds of limiting factors. And we're going to go into some of these because I think it's really fascinating. And every species has its story. And that's what I think as a naturalist that I love, trying to understand the story, just like each one of us has a story of our lives and how we came to be sitting here tonight. Each one of these species has a remarkable story. Habitat's the most important word in the wildlife vocabulary. This is prairie dog developers, is what that says. So, the second most important word would be exotics at this stage of the game. Wasn't the case back when. So let's look at that macro picture of habitat and just look at winter. Any of you who live here or who get the heck out of here, as the case may be when winter comes around, know what this is all about. You can't see these numbers, but up where we are, I live in Iron County, so I'm over here. You guys are over here somewhere. Pretty much just due west, due east of you guys. So -1 degree Fahrenheit is our average minimum temperature every night in January. So wildlife has to deal with below zero fundamentally every night just in January. We have 5 months of winter, as you're probably all well aware, about 150 days of snow cover and ice cover. Think about that as a wildlife species, as a black-capped chickadee or a red fox or whatever you might be. Winter's the ultimate limiting factor for all wildlife species in the North Woods. You know, and down here, your folks live right down here, right? Is that right? Somewhere down there in Iowa?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the difference in temperature here is this is, that would be about 8 degrees average. So it's 9 degrees difference to 10 degrees difference in average January temperatures between northern Wisconsin and southern
Geez,
Wisconsin.
even Green Bay gets cold.
Yeah, Green Bay's, but nowhere near as cold as us. Green Bay's kind of the banana belt as far as I'm concerned compared down south. Then you got to throw in soil, and where I live is in this yellow stuff here, and this yellow stuff is all sand. Here's a bunch of sand over here, and here's a bunch of sand over here. And most of the rest of the North Woods is sandy loam. Okay, so where you guys are over here, believe it or not, you are considered to be in mostly sandy loam or sandy forested silty soils. Not as much sand as we have right where we are. So you got to put weather and soil together, and when you put those things together, you get in Wisconsin the tension zone. You get this place where southern species reach their northernmost range and northern species reach their southernmost range. And this is a wonderful chart showing the number of species that across this zone drop out. So if you're in Outagamie County here, 66 species drop out. That means the northern species won't go any further south and southern won't go any further north. Here you guys are up in Bayfield County. We're in southern Bayfield, right? Is that where we are? I have no idea where we are.
Yeah,
Over here somewhere.
right there.
You only have 5 species in Iron County, where I am only 1 species. Still trying to figure out what that 1 species is. But you can tell the difference in how winter impacts species and how they move. Just drive down Highway 51, right? Or go 53 or whatever you want, north to south, and just watch how those communities change. And here's a great example of it. This is the early vegetation of Wisconsin prior to settlement map. And here's that tension zone going right along here. Up here is the northern mesic forest, which is hemlock hardwoods with some pine. And down here is all this oak savanna and tall grass prairie kind of country. So when we talk about climate change, and I'm not going to talk about it, but say we did, if you're going to raise that temperature 8 degrees, what are you going to do? You're going to bring that
That's stuff north.
up there.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. It's not that simple. It's way more complicated than that, but that's the bottom line. Is when we talk about the differential in temperature, folks often say, well, that doesn't seem like very much, and it doesn't seem like very much. But there it
But you
is.
can't stop it, right?
Pardon me?
You can't really stop the climate change.
Well, we don't want to go there, but I think you could if we wanted to make that.
I would believe that you would.
So let's talk about habitat and talk about food to begin with. This says, nope, nope, I don't like that at all, too many legs. So that's right. So when we talk about some of that complexity for habitat in terms of food, we need to talk about the right kind. So if you're a deer, balsam is inedible for you. It's not inedible, you can eat it, but it's undigestible, whereas cedar and hemlock is candy, okay? The right quality, is it a fresh bite, is it fat versus sugar? The right quantity, how much do you need at particular times for nesting, denning, hibernation, etc. The right interspersion. Interspersion means spacing. You got to have the food so that you can get to it without being eaten on the way, right? That kind of thing. Is it reachable? Are you exposed to predation? Is it within your home range, etc., etc.? So these are some of the considerations, some of the complexity in terms of food. Folks often ask, so what good is it? Well, all this coevolution has occurred. We talk an awful lot about competition, but coevolution is the story of the world. Let's see, mosquitoes, gnats, flies, ants, those jerks, we didn't order stink bugs on this thing. What good is a particular insect is often asked of me, and this is the particular one that's asked of me, what good are mosquitoes? And this says, pull out, Benny, pull out, you've hit an artery. You can all relate to that one. But what good are mosquitoes? Well, while the females are biting us, what are those dull males out there doing? They're pollinating flowers. They're the main pollinator in the Arctic, the most important pollinating species, mosquitoes. Do they have an importance? Yeah, they have an importance. And a friend of mine says without mosquitoes, we wouldn't really have wild land. He says mosquitoes have kept more land wild than legislation ever will. Oh, my goodness, Harold, now there goes one big mosquito. We had a book we read to our daughter, which was Flat Stanley. Remember Flat Stanley? This is good. It was Flat Harold in this case. So in terms, just to throw this in here, feeding wildlife, what's the problems with it? It changes behaviors. It's Bob, all right, but look at those vacuous eyes, that stupid grin on his face. He's been domesticated, I tell you. You see Bob there with his tongue hanging out and big eyes. Yeah, he's been domesticated. So there's problems with feeding wildlife because we help them exceed their carrying capacity, we create dependencies, we alter their seasonal movements, and we increase disease transmission. Now, having said that, I feed birds, so guilty. I mean, but there's trade-offs, right? And birds may not be as bad as feeding deer, and we probably don't even want to go into this kind of thing. But feeding wildlife alters behaviors, and when we do that, we need to think about what it is we may be causing or not causing, and evaluate that. Because there's great pleasure, of course, in feeding animals to see them. But there may be some unintended consequences you need to take into account. So water, when we're talking about food, water, and cover, the same issues, right quality, right quantity, right timing, right interspersion. Here's a flood happening. Where I live, I spend a lot of time trying to, because we're on the Manitowish River, which floods every year. I always try to impress folks with the idea that floods are really good. They're really very helpful, just as fire is very helpful, very necessary. We've bought into that ecologically, but a lot of folks don't buy into flood. I don't know if I have. Yeah, here's the value of floods. What good are floods? Well, they scour the stream bottoms and silt, which is a key to some spawning species. It saturates the wetlands, so there's this big sponge out there that can release all that water slowly throughout the summer. It scrubs the wetlands of all this organic material and distributes them. You can read all that. It's good stuff and important stuff. And when we build dams and we create alteration to river habitats so that they don't flood any longer, we've created some wildlife challenges that were unintended. Talk about cover real quick. Now here's a feature you folks would really enjoy. Voila, a tree right off the master bedroom. Like the tails are wagging right there. So the cover is the same story. The right quantity, right quality, right interspersion, right timing. And then, cover is a whole bunch of stuff. It's where do you go to hide, to escape from predation, where do you go to breed and or to spawn, where do you go to den or nest, where do you go to roost at night, where do you get shelter from extremes. And that changes with the seasons. Think of deer, for instance. Where do deer like to spend their time in the summer versus where they like to spend their time in the winter? Very different places. It's important in this whole cover issue to talk about cleanliness. This joke says, clean it up, clean it up. Climbing is supposed to be a rat hole. I think some men in this audience can particularly relate to that. That's usually us in the chair. But cleanliness is not next to godliness, and I advocate all the time for random chaos in the natural world. Along our lake shores and within our lakes in particular, but along our forest floors as well, because dead and dying trees and all that litter that falls on that forest floor provides habitat. There's nothing that goes to waste. I hate that phrase when people say it's going to waste, we got to do something with it. Nothing's going to waste. And some examples of that is birds that nest on the ground. Here's an ovenbird. It's got a song that you should all know. It goes, teacher, 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 really loud, or pizza, 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 because you can put the pizza into the oven and you can remember ovenbird easily. But it has this vertical nest that they actually walk into like an oven door versus having a horizontal nest. But where do they want it? They want it on a forest floor with cover, of course. If you've cleaned up your woods, or somebody has cleaned up the woods, and all you have basically is a park, it's great for walking, but it means that nest will be immediately polluted. Hermit thrush, hopefully you all know the song of the hermit thrush. Their typical song lasts only a few seconds, but it includes 45 to 100 notes. It's this musical microcosm. It's like listening to the opening of a grand overture, a number of people have written. It's just a phenomenally beautiful song. But where do they nest? On the forest floor. A whole bunch of birds nest on that forest floor, but a whole bunch of birds nest in dead and dying trees. Pileated woodpecker are condo developers in the Northwoods, right? I mean, you know, pick your apartment right there. Where do you want to go? And here's 32 reasons to leave those dead and dying trees alone on your property. These are all birds that nest in cavities, and I will point out several that are really important. One being black-capped chickadee. Black-capped chickadees won't be coming to your feeder unless they have a dead tree to be nesting in. They nest in cavities. Nor will, where are they? Yep, white-breasted nuthatches and red-breasted nuthatches, they also nest in cavities. So these very common birds that we see all the time, most of us don't associate with cavity nesters. We associate owls and wood ducks and so forth. But there's a number of small songbirds that utilize cavities as well. One of the most interesting, I think, is the brown creeper. It nests behind loose bark on dead and dying trees, which would be a great place to nest, of course. It'd be pretty dry back there. American martin dens in big old trees. Do you see them right there?
Oh, the big old martin.
And that white cedar?
Oh, yeah.
So it's not just birds, it's mammals. A great study was done by the University of Wisconsin-Trump Lake Research Station just down the road from us on two lakes where they added, these are two wilderness lakes, they added horsewoody habitat to the edge of the lake and into the water. They cut down a whole bunch of trees and dropped them in the winter onto the ice so they'd fall into the water. And on this other lake, they had a bunch of graduate students come and take away all of the horsewoody habitat so the shoreline was completely denuded of all the wood. They even tore apart beaver lodges, which if you ever try to do that someday, good luck with that. And what they found was that they crashed the yellow perch population, which then crashed the smallmouth and largemouth bass populations as well. And they ended up with these bass predating upon one another and also actually eating rodents. They found that in their stomach, the major prey that they found were mice after a certain point. So they were actually starving to death and going up to the shoreline and waiting for mice to come down and get a drink of water, which is pretty amazing. But so what's the value of horsewoody habitat along shorelines? It's amazing habitat for insects and for fish, the whole food chain up the ladder. It's a great study if you want to pull it up someday on the internet. So when we think of underwater, we need to think of that as a prairie. All those weeds are important. A weed's a plant without a press agent. You know, so these guys have a value. Think of the forest understory. You want a whole lot of plants. You want them small, you want them a little bit larger herbaceously, then you want small shrubs, you want tall shrubs, small trees, tall trees. You want all these different layers. And the same thing's true within your lake. This may be a terrible place to swim, but it'll be a fabulous place as habitat for a whole lot of fish. So there's winners and losers as habitat changes, and nature abhors a vacuum, so it will always make sure that there's something in that vacuum. If you can't read this, it says, the woods were dark and foreboding, and Alice sensed the sinister eyes were watching her every step. Worst of all, she knew that nature abhorred a vacuum. my favorite one of them all. They're like Alice out there. Sweeping up the woods, I guess. So nature's dynamic. Nature, there's winners and losers. There is no perfect habitat because something's going to not be there. If you have old growth, you're going to eliminate all kinds of species that need that full sun habitat of young aspen and so forth. Vice versa, same deal. Those full sun habitats, critters that need some shade and need those big trees won't be there. You call this a niche or a niche. I always call it a niche. Call this a niche. So the niche is the role or the function or profession of each species. What do they do? What's their job? There can't be more bears than there are bear jobs. Can't be more deer than there are deer jobs. We call this a niche. Yeah. What are the most successful species? Those are the ones that have the most opportunistic behaviors that can go into almost any niche or niche, however you want to pronounce it, and can survive there. The least successful are specialists. So this says, come on, look at those fangs. Look at these claws. You think we're supposed to eat just honey and berries? Definitely more than that. So the most opportunistic species, I think, of all birds is American robins. Look at its, there's its breeding range. So from basically Mexico, it goes down into Mexico, all the way to the tip of Alaska. All the way over here to, I don't know, what is that? Quebec way up there, Newfoundland, somewhere up there. Anyway, the entire United States. That's the most opportunistic species. And an example of one that is less opportunistic would be Kirtland warbler. And it needs specific jack pine habitat, 5-year-old to 16-year-old jack pines. And if they don't have that, they don't nest. So there's so much of a specialist that there's very few places you can find. This is an endangered species because it's so specialized. So let's talk about carrying capacity because this impacts how many animals you might have in any particular area. That's the upper limit of a population a habitat can support. I always think of it as how much food you have in your cupboard. Now you also need to talk about cover and water, but how much food is available is an easy way to think about it, because only so many people can eat breakfast at your house, and then the food's gone, right? So there's that carrying capacity for food, water, and cover, but there's also all these limiting factors, and then there's the law of the minimum and the law of the maximum, and there's a whole bunch of variations on this, too much phosphorus or too little this, so forth and so on. Any condition that nears or surpasses the limits of tolerance for that particular species in that particular place. An example would be winter temperatures. What's the breaking point for a species at which point it dies? When you think of trees, minus 40 degrees is kind of the magic number for an awful lot of our trees that are not pure northern trees, so like hemlock and white pine, red oaks and so forth. At minus 40, their antifreeze pops. The tree literally explodes, just like your antifreeze in your car can only go down so far, and then your radiator freezes, right? So phosphorus, nitrogen, stopover habitat is on migration, where you're going to stop, and are there motels along the way? If there aren't, where are you going to stay, where are you going to eat, depth of snow, predators, populations, prey population, all this stuff is all about limiting factors that influence the carrying capacity on a particular habitat. And then we have this other little item down here called social carrying capacity, and that's how much we are willing to tolerate of an animal being in a particular habitat. Wolves are the great example right now in the North Woods. We have a social carrying capacity, at least for some people, of 0. And we have for other people, well, maybe we'll say 300 at most, because we're still not so sure about it. And then there's the biological carrying capacity, which biologists say is about 2,000 for all of northern Wisconsin. We could biologically sustain that many. But will we have that many? No, because our social carrying capacity at this point is prevented. We have some other species that have undue impacts upon, I don't know if undue is the right word, they just have a very large impact on the planet. They're called keystone species. Beaver is one. No, he's not busy. In fact, the whole thing is just a myth. So a keystone species alters the habitat far beyond what their individual numbers you would think that they'd be able to do. And here's an example, a research study on 2 pristine rivers in Canada found where there's no development and there's no trapping. and there hasn't been for centuries as far as they can tell. They found that beavers build on average 17 dams per mile. How many yards in a mile? 1,760, so 17 into 1,760 goes about 100 times, so that's a dam every 100 yards on a river. Is that a keystone species? Yeah, that's a keystone species. They're building all these dams, and this wonderful study says where beaver remain largely unexploited, their activities influence 20 to 40% of the total length of these second and fifth order streams, which are most of the rivers in this world, with the alterations remaining a part of the landscape for centuries. Phenomenal impacts on the landscape by dint of their damming up rivers. So they're a keystone species. So what good are beaver? People often say, well, ask the wood duck, ask a Canada goose, ask any number of waterfowl species that like those pools, ask herons that nest in those dead trees that were killed off by that beaver dam that nest in that rookery that's now been created. So it's habitat. Deer are other keystone species, and they have a split personality. So they're a grazer right now. There's a wonderful albino buck down by us. So for 4 months out of the year, they're eating green plants, and for 8 months of the year, they're a browser. They're eating buds in particular. Problem is they eat 5 pounds of woody browse a day in winter. 5 pounds of buds, how many buds is that? Beats the heck out of me. We've never counted it, but we would like to someday, so I don't keep saying this all the time. But someday we'll figure it out. But it's one hell of a lot of buds, right? It's a lot of buds. So they eat cereal 4 months out of the year, and they eat the box the other 8 months. That's what they do. So here's a deer exposure down by us near Boulder Junction, right, in Vilas County. Can you guess which side of the exposure the deer are living on?
This side.
This side here, I hope you're guessing that side. Is there a slight difference between this side and that side?
Yeah.
Just a slight difference. That's called eating 5 pounds of woody browse a day in the winter for 5 months. Deer and edge species that says lumber of a birthmark, Hal. So when we build younger forests, when we do all the cutting that we do, it creates lots of edge, and deer are going to thrive. When we build older forests, when we're in that old growth forest that we hopefully may get into tomorrow near Forest Lodge, deer don't do as well. They don't necessarily leave, that's not quite correct, but they're reducing their numbers. But then we have this thing called winter, so it's really not that simple. Where do deer want to be in the winter? They want to be in the heaviest conifer cover that they can be, and that's old growth hemlocks and old growth cedar. So they don't really do well in summer in those areas because there's not much to eat in the understory, but in winter you want to be out of that cold as much as you can and out of that snow, and you want to be with that heavy, heavy conifer cover over your head. So deer cause what are called trophic cascades, which just means that by eating all that understory vegetation that they eat, they disturb a whole lot of other species you wouldn't think about. It's not just that they're eating those plants. Here's 33 species of birds, and I know you can't read those from where you are, that nest on the ground. We already talked about 2 of them, the hermit thrush and the ovenbird, but there's a whole bunch of other ones here: bobolink, Canada warbler, Connecticut warbler, dark-eyed junco, hermit thrush, LeConte sparrow, Lincoln sparrow, Louisiana water thrush. A whole bunch of birds nest on the ground. And so again, if you alter that cover, if in effect the deer are out there cleaning the joint up with all that they eat, they create this trophic, which is a feeding cascade or life stage kind of cascade. Another example of a trophic cascade, which I think was really fascinating, was this idea that if you increase predation on lakes, well, I'll just go into it. In Madison, if you've been down to Madison, Lake Mendota has got incredible algae issues, right? So the biologists said, okay, we know how to clean that up, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to introduce a whole bunch of walleyes. Okay, we'll get to how that was supposed to work. So they introduced 2,700,000 walleye fingerlings they put into Lake Mendota over 12 years. So it's over a fairly long period of time. And what they wanted to create was a trophic cascade. By increasing the walleyes, they increased the predation of smaller fish. Okay? Right? Walleyes eat small fish. So they reduced the number of small fish. Well, what do the small fish eat? Small fish eat zooplankton. So if there were less small fish, there were way more zooplankton. Well, what does zooplankton eat? They eat phytoplankton. Phytoplankton is algae. Do you get it? So more zooplankton, more algae, voila, less algae, better water clarity, and that actually worked. What didn't work was all the walleye fishermen that showed up and destroyed the walleye population because they said, oh, it's a bonanza. There are walleyes everywhere in Lake Mendota, we're going to fish them out. And they did. Minor
So there
problem.
isn't any more down there?
Well, there's walleye in there, but there aren't enough to, it worked, but only worked for a short time until it was overfished. They needed to stop, they needed to create some size slots and make sure that the fish weren't overfished, but there's all kinds of there's social carrying capacity stuff that goes on. The fishermen were not happy with that, blah, blah, blah. But it created one of these trophic cascades. Impolite as they were, the other bears could never help staring at Larry's enormous deer bite. So let's talk about some about predator-prey relationships, and I've got to hurry up and be done here. Bears eat, maybe some people estimate 20% of the fawns. Bears eat a whole lot of fawns, which is real interesting because people are so ready to blame wolves for eating fawns, but bears eat a whole lot more. And some predators cause a lot of controversy. Here's a merlin. I don't know how many of you have ever seen a merlin. It's a little falcon. And what do they like to eat? Well, all the little birds that you feed her, all the goldfinch and the black-capped chickadees and so forth. So when one of these shows up at somebody's feeder, they call me up and they go, I have this incredibly beautiful bird, I don't know what it is, what is it, what is it? We go through the ID and I say, oh, it's a merlin, they've never heard of a merlin, they're thrilled, you've probably had this experience. And then they say, well, what does it eat? And then, well, it eats your chickadees and eats your goldfinch. And they go, well, how do I get rid of it? So it's nations of despair kind of thing go on. So some cause controversy. Double-crested cormorants in Green Bay. There's 12,000 nests of those guys. They eat on average 1 pound of fish a day. Wow. Well, so the fishermen in Green Bay want to blame the cormorants for the reduction in yellow perch. Well, there may be a whole bunch of other reasons, but this is an easy guy to blame. And then there's the gray wolf, which is such a controversial critter in the northwoods. But the bottom line is predators need prey and prey need predators. But it's not linear and it's not simple. I'm going to give you an example of another trophic cascade which happened in Yellowstone, but it's not as simple as what I'm going to say here. Which is when they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, there's too many elk. Elk well, I explained it. Elk are browsers in winter, the best browsers along rivers. They're high populations that browsed all the river banks down and had removed all this habitat for the birds that nested on the ground, for beaver, for a whole bunch of things that would have eaten things close to the ground, but the elk had removed all of them. And in fact, they'd altered some of the river habitat because all the water was able to flush down easier into the rivers. But anyway, the wolves began killing the elk, and more importantly, they began moving the elk around. They didn't necessarily have to kill them, they just had to get them away from those rivers. So now there's fewer elk, it resulted in less browsing. The cottonwood, the aspen, the willows we grew, the canopy grew. Now beavers, bird, bison population increased, the water quality actually got better. It made a better river system. This was a classic study, but it's not that simple because then other people went back in there and said, okay, let's look at this more carefully. And the bottom line in all this is they found that the stream hydrology was also being impacted by beavers. And if the beavers had been removed, which they had, now that they came back, they were building all these dams that were impounding water, which was allowing nutrients to settle. A whole bunch of things were happening that helped the willows regrow also. So it wasn't just as simple as reintroducing the wolves. Nothing's ever that simple. Smoking guns are real hard to find in the natural world, in my opinion. Things are intricate, and that's what's cool about it. But it also makes us crazy as people because we want A to yield B, and that isn't the way it usually works. So here's a great example of why we need predators. Here's cottontail rabbits. They have basically 5 per young in a litter per year. Let's give them 2 litters per year, so they have 10 per year. Let's start out with 10. At the end of the year, I'm going to go through this super fast. You'll have 60 because they'll have 50 offspring. Breeding population was 10. Start off with 60. Get to 360, start off with 360, 2,100, 2,100, 12,000, 12,000, 77,000, 77,000, 466,000 after 6 years. Exponential growth. If nobody's eating the cottontail rabbits. What's that? So, and if there's not disease, and if there's not winter or starvation and all kinds of things. So, this kind of population growth obviously is a problem. So we need predators. So if you're, in terms of family, I got to run through this quick. Population dynamics, the natality of the number of young you have. There's ways of doing this. You can have a whole bunch of little ones. Of course, long before you mature, most of you will be eaten. You know, that's a tough statement to make to your kids. To have very many, have them really small, don't parent them, and hope that a few make it. Okay? Great example are turtles. Right? Snapping turtles and painted turtles and so forth. Another great example are frogs laying all their eggs and then they leave. It's wonderful. Some of you as parents may think this was a pretty good idea. Would have liked to have tried that. Here's a mayfly hatch. Back in 2003, there were so many mayflies hatching at that point, it was a major thunderstorm appearing on Doppler radar. This is down across. So up in that corner there of northern Iowa, you guys are seeing that as well.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, dragonflies, same thing. I mean, we have these massive hatches. I threw this in here just because I like this. All this insect breeding, what's really going on? This says fly dates. Are those her lips? Maybe those other doohickeys are her lips. Oh my God, he's looking for my lips. This has nothing to do with anything. I just really liked it, so. Think about insects breeding. What are they looking for in there? And the other, if you're not going to do the small young gambit, you're going to do the large young gambit, which is what we do. You have very few young, and they're big, and you parent them for a really long time. Bears and moose and so forth. And there's lots of variations on this theme. You can have lots more litters. You can have a short gestation, a bull, 21 days, and elephants, 2 years. Think about being pregnant for 2 years. Breeding age, eagles 4 years, muskrat first year. So you can be polygamous, you can be monogamous. There are all kinds of things you can do to alter this kind of natality concept. There's lots of courtship and mating behaviors. Every animal has a unique evolutionary story. Oh, Ginger, you look absolutely stunning, and whatever you rolled in sure does stink. Have you ever thought about the fact that dogs are supposed to smell like 55 times more acutely than we do? Can you imagine the stuff that they roll and smell in that 55 times more than how much you already smell? I mean, it just would kill you. You'd think it would knock you out. Anyway. Avian courtship, well, here we are, my little chickadee. So there's all these behaviors and song and everything that are being used to increase nesting success by choosing the most vigorous mate, and they're doing it without having to knock one another out. They're doing it through showing their individual vigor, which is pretty cool. I'm just going to skip past this. There's problems with studying courtship. When ornithologists are mutually attracted, some of you may have done this, I don't know. Watch birds too long, this can happen too. Emily, be worried about that. This can happen. So, when we're talking about bird song, and I'm almost done, is it innate or learned? It depends on the species. Here's beginning duck. Quack, quack, quack. So what are they saying to each other? Who knows? Communications through song and call notes for birds. Lewis, phone call. I like that. Phone call. Anyway, the brown thrasher sings over 2,000 songs and learns his new song endlessly. You should have this. Can you hear that? Yeah. So this guy learns his songs constantly. They stopped counting the number of songs at 2,000 because it just was more. So this is a mimic. He usually repeats this song twice. Usually, mockingbirds do 3 times, and catbirds do it once. They're all 3 of those are mimics. So they learn their songs. On the other hand, we have the least flycatcher who can only do chibak, 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 chibak. It's innate. You can do anything you want with that bird. It will only do that. How about a whippoorwill? How many of you have ever heard of whippoorwills? and wanted to shoot them.
It's nice for about 5 minutes. And then it's like,
It's not even nice for 5 minutes.
yeah.
5 minutes of that, and you get out the slingshot.
30 seconds.
Is that what's so annoying about those? And are they, they're not
They're crazy. They're just crazy. What?
they're not a harmful bird.
Not a harmful bird in the least. Not at all. Not at all. But this is what the male does all night long. Yeah, it's just great. It's all about mammal communication. Donnie and his new canine decoder, Professor Schwartzman, becomes the first human being on Earth to hear what barking dogs are actually saying. And they're all saying, hey, 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 So what are they saying? Who knows? But that's what makes it so fascinating. Trying to decode this. Professor Schwartzman didn't learn much. So some winter options: migrate, adapt, or die. MAD, greatest limiting factor in the north. Here we are last summer going south. Wait a minute. We went north last summer. The stupid slide's in backwards. I'm just going to buzz through these here at the end because we're too late. But behavioral adaptations to winter, I'm not going to go into it, but it says, well, once again, here we are. Why are we here and how are we going to survive? Right. And it's really interesting to look at behavioral adaptations of animals, birds and mammals, and some insects who stay throughout the winter. How do they do that up here? It's fascinating. Winter ecology is fascinating. There's a whole lot going on out there, even if it doesn't seem like it. Physical adaptations to winter. And please let Mom, Dad, Rex, Ginger, Tucker, me, and all the rest of the family see color. That could be helpful. Migratory behaviors. Okay, everyone, we'll be departing for Antarctica in about 15 minutes. If anyone thinks he may be in the wrong migration, let us know now. And migration. There's a lot of birds that show up that their migratory compass is a little askew. We had brown pelicans one year in Mercer. We had some amazing things show up, and I'm sure you have them show up here in Cable and up in this area as well. Navigation, there's all kinds of aspects of navigation using all these different means by which that hummingbird shows up at your feeder after a many thousand-mile flight. Think about that sometime. How do they show up in your backyard at your feeder? If you don't have the feeder out, what does that bird do? It looks right in your window and says, hey. Anybody ever had that happen? If you don't have the feeder out? Hummingbird's like, oh, I just flew 2,000 miles. What's going on? Where's my feeder?
I have never had that happen, and I haven't had any hummingbird.
Okay. Well, it's just amazing how, if you ever flown over the North Woods and seen all those lakes, this guy, first of all, flies at night anyway, so how's he going to figure that out? Well, this isn't the hummingbird, this is red-eyed vireo. But anyhow, we got to keep on going. I'm almost done. Invasive species. Here's the most important invasive species that I know of. It says how poodles first came to North America. You see them in there? Little French poodles in there. I think they're invasive species. I want them removed. But anyway. So what about invasive species? Great book I'd recommend, Bringing Nature Home, Sustaining Wildlife with Native Plants. And Doug Tallamay goes on to talk about native insectivauna cannot use or will not use alien plants. So if you're planting plants that don't belong here, insects won't use them. Now that may be something you want. You may say, well, I don't want all those insects. Well, most insects aren't biting you. It's mosquitoes and black flies and horseflies and deer flies and then not very many others. So his whole thesis is a land without insects is a land without most forms of higher life because that's the bottom of the food chain. So we need to plant native species to try to end. It's not just about getting rid of invasives. It's also about our yards and making sure that we always are planting natives. Great book. What might wildlife think about humans? I think they would like this turnabout. My, what was that? the tables on us. What do we really know about animal intelligence and life? Here's Colonel Sanders at the pearly gates. And he's saying, he's going to have a problem. And the problem with our human consciousness, we want to do single species management. Here, I'll tell you what this means, Norm. No size restrictions and screw the limit. Yeah, so we want to think, deer, give us the most deer possible, give us the most walleye, or give us whatever. And that just, we can't be thinking that way. The Xenons came with the answers to many secrets of the universe. Verne regrettably came with thick glasses and his deer rifle. So even when the answers are out there, we tend to have pretty thick glasses. And we tend to shoot first off and then ask questions later. And there's, we got to really think hard about a lot of this stuff. Climate change. Do we need indisputable proof? I follow the precautionary principle, which means you practice caution in the context of reality, or of uncertainty, I'm sorry. If there's uncertainty, you leap. You look before you leap. This is it, Jenkins. Indisputable proof that the Ice Age caught these people completely off guard. There's the caveman in the outhouse, right? Indisputable proof. That's what we need. And where the real work is getting done and where we understand very little. Hey, I got news for you, sweetheart. I am the lowest form of life. So when we're trying to figure out all this wildlife stuff, think about your stomach and, what goes on digestively and how complicated that is. We're the most studied species on the planet, and we still don't really understand that very well. Amongst many other things we don't understand about ourselves. So trying to understand all the microbiology of life on this planet is just through the roof complicated. So who's really in control? These are acts of God. Acts of God, it says there's God. Mystery and randomness. God's a pretty talented guy. And oops. Past my last slide here. So just with a couple thoughts. Don't stop to ask whether the animal or plant that you meet deserves your sympathy or how much it feels or even whether it can feel at all. Respect it and consider all life sacred. And the highest treason, the meanest treason, is to deny the holiness of this little planet on which we journey through the cold void of space, Edward Abbey. Yeah. So whatever sacred might mean to you, I'm not trying to give any religious connotation necessarily, but all life is precious, all life is necessary of our reverence, needs our reverence, needs to be considered holy in my opinion. And I think I'm done. Thanks for being here. Way too late and you're all sitting there now.
You still live in Manchester?
I still live in Manitowish, yes, I do. And my wife's grandparents' old home, which is a way cool place for us to live. So I know you're in steel chairs. You're welcome to run out the door right now, but I can take one or two questions if people wanted to. Otherwise, we can end it. So, any questions, comments, better stories, better jokes?
I just had one question. You had a picture of the song and the whippoorwill.
Yeah.
And I remember those from 25, 30 years ago, and I haven't heard them in a long time.
Right. So there's a decline in the population. That's really unclear what's going on. A lot of it's considered to be habitat. They really like open oak woodlands because they're a night feeder. They're going to fly at night with their mouth wide open. They're kind of trawling for insects, in effect. And so they need this open woodland of decent-sized trees and not so much in the understory. And apparently that habitat is significantly reduced. And then, they're neotropical migrants, so what's going on in Central and South America where they're wintering. So a lot of that's unclear. If anybody has any other things to add, Emily, anything more about what it was. So the population is definitely down. But there's still some. Mary and I do a frog count every year for the DNR, and we've done it for umpteen years. And there's 2 sites we go to every year, and whippoorwills are still there in those 2 particular sites, which is great.
Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Thanks.
What happened to Canadian jays? The lumberjacks?
Yeah.
Why are they gone?
So you're not seeing them here, and you're used to seeing them in this area? Okay, so even way farther north up in the boundary waters, you're not seeing them up there either?
Seriously, who's that one?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we're right here. We're at the southernmost edge of the range. These are gray jays, Canada jays. We're at the absolute southernmost edge of the range.
We used to have Canadian jays at our place in Gunford Lake until about 6 or 7 years ago. Haven't seen one since.
So I
Okay.
read some research where basically their refrigerator is broken. So they store food for the winter, meat type food. They actually cache.
Oh yeah, we used to feed them in the honey.
Yeah, and it doesn't stay cold enough, long enough to preserve their food. I think they nest really early in the spring, and they need that cached meat to keep them in food while they have their young, and it is thawing and rotting. Is one explanation, probably of multiple things going on that I read.
Wisconsin isn't cold enough in the winter to store the food?
I know. It seems crazy, right? But actually, it fluctuates, and it's not that our average temperature has risen so much already. It's that it's fluctuating more widely, and there's enough thaws that actually allow their food to go bad.
So what gray jays have is this very sticky saliva, just to build on that, and they will actually gather food together from your deer camp or wherever, and they'll kind of roll it up in a ball and stick it together, and then they'll cache it in trees to get them through the winter. So if you have thaw cycles coming that weren't here historically, you're losing that food source. So that's one of the explanations for why gray jays, as climate change, as we warm up, those species that are at the southernmost edge of the range are going to move further north.
So you're saying in library.
So is it more territorial, or you're seeing more in Montana, Wyoming, or?
Well,
Because I haven't seen there either.
Yeah,
They're
you know,
flying there
and
too.
I know like just a study or two as well, so my ignorance is far more profound than my knowledge, but they will be moving north, as all species will be moving north as we continue on average to have warmer winters. And where are we having the warmest winters? Places like Alaska and up in the Northwest Territories. Those guys, when we're freezing, two winters ago, we were having a terrible winter, right? Really cold, really long. They were like 16 degrees above normal up there. So I mean, when you're a gray jay, where do you go? You know, so up north, things are happening a little different than what they're happening here, but they are still happening here. And I don't want to get political, and I don't want anybody to yell at me and say I'm lying about climate change, but just there's all kinds of wonderful maps. There's a great website called Wiki Wisconsin Climate Change Initiatives on WICCI. If you just Google that, they have all these fabulous maps showing Wisconsin, all the areas in Wisconsin, how they've changed in the last couple of decades. And it's very localized. It's interesting. This area of northwestern Wisconsin is changing more than any other place in the state. You guys are warming up a lot faster than we are in north central and into northeastern Wisconsin. Not sure why, but the average temperatures here are significantly higher in the winter compared to what they were normally. So anyway, that might help.
There was a slide where it said that native insects can't live on alien plants.
Right.
I don't think that's true entirely. I mean, I agree that we need to plant more native plants. I don't have any problem with that. But I spent a whole summer walking up and down our road and photographing oxeye daisies. And there were at least 40 different animals making a living on those. So that statement is not entirely true.
Okay. So it's a broad generalization. And Doug Tallamy is a PC insect guy, so his entomologist, so he has all kinds of examples of plants that are non-native. Phragmites, for instance, Phragmites is all over the Bay of Green Bay. It's a wetland plant.
Oh, I know.
And over in Europe, all kinds of species utilize that plant. Here, like none. Because insects and plants co-evolved.
Oh, I know.
And our insects. So in the case of oxeye daisy, I have no explanation. I don't know why the insects are saying it's okay, but they're not saying Phragmites is. But his examples are multitudinous, and I think there may be That's the concern. He's just saying if we're able to plant those native species as a whole, as a generality, we'll be far better off.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm glad you pointed
I
that
don't
out.
quarrel with that, I think.
In preference to native trees.
In preference.
Yeah, because there are some species, some insect species that are utilizing purple loosestrife, and there's some bird species that are utilizing it, but just not as many as if they were native species. Anybody else? One more?
I don't really want to direct this question, but the elk population here in the Biolite area, you guys are in Kentucky elk in now because is it the wolf population, or are we defeating the purpose of even really trying to increase elk in this area?
I don't know diddly about you, elk. To be honest, I'm not even going to try.
So one reason they had to bring in more elk is because they didn't bring in enough the first time to have enough genetic diversity. I think was part of it. And there's probably other complications. The wolves have been a small part of it, but
Wolves are following.
I have encountered wolves on the trails out here.
Is it fun?
I think so.
Is it necessary?
I don't really want to get into that. That's a great discussion, but we have them here. So, but there's resources at the DNR that would be able to tell you more about why they had to bring in more elk for that project. So,
I apologize for not knowing
Diversity
enough
was
to
the
even.
primary
Yeah.
reason.
Pardon me?
The genetic diversity, what was needed was the primary reason for bringing in
Yeah.
other
Sorry.
genetic.
I'm just wondering if the habitat in the area is solicitous to the elk to live here.
What's going to happen when a wolf takes a little kid
Yeah.
off the stop?
I think, you guys are probably going to have to talk to somebody who actually works in the Forest Service or the DNR in this area to really get answers to your
Well,
question.
and I'll just give you a quick thing on that. What happens when the wolf takes a little kid? All hell will break loose, and it'll be a terrible shame because, historically the statistics say they don't. And the big question that I've always had is why don't they? That's an interesting question, and I'd love you to consider it, everybody. Why don't wolves kill us?
But they don't.
They should. They should. We're slow. We're corn-fed. We're most of us overweight, whatever. But they should be taking us left and right. I'm out in the woods all the time. You're probably out in the woods all the time. Wolves are all around us, and they do not kill us. They may come close, but they don't do anything to us. And so when it does happen, which it will probably happen someday, unfortunately, we have black bear that have killed human beings. We have coyotes that have killed human beings. I'll bet we have dachshunds that have killed human beings. We have German shepherds that kill human beings. Whatever. We will accept that and be okay with that. But when the wolf does it, all hell will break loose, and it'll be a real shame because statistically, if you believe the statistics, and I don't know necessarily that you would, but I don't know what else to believe because I'm not smart enough to believe anything else than what the researchers tell me. But they just don't, and I think that's fascinating. And I wonder if there isn't a big enough connection between us and dogs over centuries, over millennia, that these wolves. I just don't get it. They really, I mean, they're afraid of us, but they're not that afraid of us. They're close to us. They're hanging out. They're eating roadkill, and people are driving right by. They're not that scared. Right? But anyway, it's just a fascinating question, and it'll be a terrible tragedy when it does happen, not only for that child, but for the wolves and for wildlife ecology in general, because it'll be hysteria versus hopefully a rational discussion. We won't have a rational discussion. So thank you all. You guys were great.
Thank you.